The grand assembly hall stretched upward like a cathedral built for gods. 7 massive thrones circled the center platform, each one designed for a different alien species. The Shadari Chancellor sat on a throne of living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. Beside him, the insectoid Vrixen representative clicked her mandibles in what might have been satisfaction. The other 5 council members watched from their elevated positions, their alien faces unreadable but their posture speaking of victory. On the center platform, alone under the gaze of thousands of observers in the gallery above, stood Ambassador Sarah Chen. She wore a simple black suit, her dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her hands rested calmly at her sides. She did not fidget. She did not look nervous. To anyone watching, she appeared almost bored. Chancellor Varix leaned forward, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's light into rainbow patterns on the polished floor. When he spoke, his voice echoed through translation devices embedded in every seat. Ambassador Chen of Earth, he began, this council has reached its verdict. The evidence against humanity is overwhelming. Your species has violated 12 articles of galactic law. You have expanded beyond your designated zones. You have militarized faster than permitted. You have interfered in the internal affairs of other species. Chen said nothing. She simply stood there, her dark eyes fixed on the Chancellor. This council represents 147 species. Varix continued. We have debated your fate for 3 days. The vote was taken 1 hour ago. The result was unanimous. He paused for effect. Humanity is hereby ordered to surrender 90% of all human-controlled space. You will submit to direct council governance. You will pay reparations totaling 6 trillion credits. You will reduce your military to defense-only forces under council supervision. A murmur ran through the gallery. Some observers chirped in approval. Others remained silent, watching. You have 48 hours to signal your acceptance, Varix said. If you refuse, humanity will be designated an outlaw species. All trade with Earth will cease. All treaties will be void, and the combined military forces of the Council will enforce compliance by any means necessary. The chamber erupted. Delegates from dozens of species stood, their various forms of applause filling the massive space. Some species drummed their limbs against their seats. Others released chemical signals that translated as celebration. The Karhoth representative, a massive reptilian creature covered in dark scales, showed his teeth in what humans would recognize as a predatory smile. Through it all, Sarah Chen stood perfectly still. Chancellor Varix raised one crystalline appendage and the chamber fell silent. Ambassador Chen, you may now respond. Will humanity accept the Council's judgment? Chen took a single step forward. Her footsteps echoed in the sudden quiet. Chancellor, members of the Council, observers, she began, her voice calm and clear. Before I respond to your ultimatum, I need clarification on one point. Varix's crystal form flickered with what might have been irritation. What clarification could you possibly need? The terms are clear. Oh, the terms are very clear, Chen agreed. I'm just curious about something. You mentioned that humanity has violated galactic law. Specifically, you cited the Treaty of First Contact as your legal basis for these charges. That is correct, Varix said. The treaty your own Diplomat signed 50 years ago when Earth joined the galactic community. Right, Chen nodded. That treaty, the one that governs all legal relationships between humanity and the Council? Yes, Varix said slowly, suspicion creeping into his translated voice. What is your point, Ambassador? Chen tilted her head slightly. My point, Chancellor, is simple. Before I respond to your ultimatum, I need to know something. Did you actually read the treaty you're invoking? The chamber fell into confused silence. Several council members exchanged glances. The Vrixen representative's antennae twitched rapidly. Of course we read it, Varix snapped. Every word was analyzed by our legal experts when it was signed. It has been the foundation of human-council relations for half a century. Every word, Chen repeated, including the additions that human negotiators insisted upon. There were several minor clauses added at humanity's request, Varix admitted. Standard diplomatic face-saving measures. Irrelevant philosophical language that your primitive species needed to feel important. Our legal AI flagged them as meaningless and we accepted them to speed negotiations. Meaningless, Chen said softly. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small data tablet. Chancellor, with your permission, I'd like to read one of those meaningless clauses. The one we called Rule Number 1. Varix waved a crystalline appendage dismissively. If you must. Chen tapped her tablet and began to read. Rule number 1, as inserted by human negotiators and accepted by the Council. In any dispute arising under this treaty, both parties acknowledge that context determines meaning, and that all prior agreements between humanity and any other party shall be considered contextual framework for interpretation of treaty obligations. She looked up from the tablet. Does that sound familiar, Chancellor? Vaguely, Varix admitted. As I said, it was flagged as irrelevant philosophical posturing. Human obsession with precise language, we assumed. It changes nothing. It changes nothing, Chen repeated. She smiled then, just slightly. It was not a warm smile. Chancellor, did you or your legal experts ever investigate what we meant by prior agreements? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Varix's crystalline features. Prior agreements? At the time of first contact, humanity had no agreements with any galactic species. You were new to space, alone, isolated. At the time of first contact, yes, Chen agreed. But the treaty doesn't specify when those prior agreements had to be made, does it? It just says prior agreements shall be considered contextual framework. The chamber's atmosphere shifted. Delegates who had been celebrating moments before now leaned forward in their seats, suddenly attentive. What are you suggesting? Varix demanded. I'm not suggesting anything, Chen said. I'm stating a fact. Over the past 20 years, humanity has negotiated individual agreements with 89 of the 147 council species. Trade deals, technology exchanges, cultural partnerships, mutual defense pacts, all legal under council law, all properly registered in the appropriate archives. The chamber exploded into chaos. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. The translation system struggled to keep up. Chancellor Varix stood, his crystal body blazing with light. Silence, he roared. Slowly the noise subsided. Ambassador Chen, if what you claim is true, these agreements were made separately from council oversight. They have no bearing on this matter. No bearing, Chen said. That's interesting, Chancellor, because Rule number 1 specifically states that prior agreements provide contextual framework for treaty interpretation. And many of those 89 agreements contain clauses about jurisdiction, sovereignty, and limits on council authority, clauses that seem remarkably relevant to your current ultimatum. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with several specific delegates. Some of them shifted uncomfortably. Others refused to meet her gaze. Before I respond to your ultimatum, Chen continued, I suggest you consult with your legal experts again. Specifically, I suggest you speak with the Zorathi Merchant League delegation. They were our first partners. They understand the situation better than most. All eyes turned to the Zorathi section of the gallery. The delegation of gray-skinned traders sat frozen, their large eyes unblinking. Chancellor Varix's crystal form dimmed. This session is adjourned. We will reconvene in 12 hours. Ambassador Chen, you will remain available. I'm not going anywhere, Chen said quietly. As the chamber emptied, delegates rushing to consult with their legal teams and allies, Sarah Chen stood alone on the center platform. She looked up at the empty thrones and allowed herself another small smile. 48 hours, she thought. They think they've won. They have no idea that we've been preparing for this exact moment for 20 years. She turned and walked toward the exit, her footsteps echoing in the vast empty space. Behind her, emergency lights began flashing as council legal teams rushed to the archives. The game had begun. The emergency council session convened exactly 12 hours later. This time, the atmosphere in the Grand Assembly Hall was different. The confidence from the previous meeting had evaporated. Delegates whispered to each other nervously. Legal advisors huddled around their representatives, tablets glowing with data. Chancellor Varix looked like he had not rested. His crystal form, usually bright and commanding, seemed duller somehow. The other council members appeared equally disturbed. Even the Karhoth representative, usually aggressive and domineering, sat quietly, his scaled face twisted in what might have been concern. Sarah Chen entered the chamber and took her position on the center platform. She carried the same data tablet. She wore the same calm expression, but now when she looked at the council, several members looked away. Ambassador Chen, Varix began, his voice lacking its earlier certainty. We have spent the night reviewing the treaty and investigating your claims about prior agreements. We have discovered several concerning facts. I thought you might, Chen said. Our legal teams found registration records for trade agreements between humanity and various council species. Varix continued. 89 agreements in total, as you stated. However, these agreements were filed in highly obscure sections of our archives. Some were registered under economic categories, others under cultural exchange, still others under scientific cooperation. No one noticed the pattern. We filed everything according to council regulations, Chen said. Every agreement was properly registered in the legally appropriate category. It's not our fault if your archival system is poorly organized. The Vrixen representative spoke up, her translated voice sharp with anger. You deliberately hid these agreements from council oversight. We hid nothing, Chen replied. We followed your rules exactly. We registered every single agreement in the proper legal category as defined by council law. If council oversight failed to notice what we were doing over the course of 20 years, that's a failure of oversight, not a violation on our part. Chancellor Varix held up a crystalline hand, silencing the Vrixen. Let us not debate methodology. The facts are clear. These agreements exist. What is less clear is your claim that they affect this council's jurisdiction over humanity. Then let me make it clear, Chen said. She tapped her tablet. 23 years ago, 3 years after first contact, the Zorathi Merchant League approached Earth with a proposal. They wanted access to human cultural products, entertainment, music, art, things that were unique to Earth. Several Zorathi delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. In exchange, Chen continued, they offered favorable trade rates and technology sharing. We negotiated an agreement. It was a good deal for both sides. But we insisted on one clause. A clause that stated if Earth ever faced what we called unreasonable interference from external authorities, the Zorathi would refuse to support such interference. That's not what the agreement says, protested a Zorathi delegate, standing suddenly. It says we would maintain neutrality in disputes. Read the full text, Chen said calmly, especially the definition of disputes. It specifically includes attempts to seize territory, impose governance, or extract reparations without clear legal basis. The agreement requires you to either oppose such actions or withdraw from the body taking such actions. The Zorathi delegate sat down slowly, his gray face pale. That was 23 years ago, Chen said. Our first agreement. We learned a lot from it. So when the Vrixen came to us 18 years ago wanting human medical research, we made sure to include similar protections in that agreement. And when the Nalthari wanted help with terraforming 12 years ago, we did the same. Over and over with 89 different species. She looked around the chamber. Every agreement was different. Each one was tailored to that species' needs and interests. But every single one included provisions about sovereignty, jurisdiction, and limits on external interference. We were very careful about that. This is manipulation, the Karhoth representative growled. You poisoned our council from within. We built relationships, Chen corrected. We offered fair deals that benefited both sides. Species came to us voluntarily. We forced no one. We threatened no one. We simply made it worth their while to be our friends rather than our masters. Chancellor Varix's crystal body pulsed with agitation. Even if these agreements exist, they were made separately from the council. They should not override council authority. Normally you'd be right, Chen agreed. Except for rule number 1, context determines meaning. Prior agreements provide contextual framework. You agreed to that language 50 years ago. Your own legal AI reviewed it and approved it. You can't ignore it now just because you don't like the consequences. We agreed to it because it seemed meaningless. Varix snapped. It seemed meaningless because you didn't bother to think about what it meant, Chen replied. You were so convinced of your superiority that you never considered humans might actually be good at diplomacy. You thought we were primitive, aggressive, simple. You never imagined we might play the long game. An elderly delegate from the Nalthari spoke up, his aquatic voice bubbling through his translation device. Ambassador Chen, are you saying that humanity planned this confrontation 20 years ago? Chen was quiet for a moment. No, she said finally. We didn't plan for you to threaten us. We hoped you wouldn't. We hoped we could build genuine partnerships and become real members of the galactic community. But we're human. We've been dealing with empires and power politics for thousands of years on our own planet. We know how these things work. We know that power respects power. We know that being liked is good, but being necessary is better. She gestured at the assembled delegates. So yes, we prepared. We built relationships. We made ourselves valuable. We created situations where hurting us would hurt our partners too. We did all of this openly, legally, and according to your own rules. If that's manipulation, then I guess we're guilty. But you might want to call it by its real name: diplomacy. The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Delegates looked at each other, at their legal advisors, at anyone but Sarah Chen. "There's more, isn't there?" Chancellor Varix asked quietly. "Tell us the rest," Chen nodded. "Many of the agreements include mutual defense clauses. Not military alliances exactly, but commitments. If one party faces external military threat without clear legal justification, the other party has obligations. Economic obligations, political obligations. In some cases, yes, defense obligations. How many?" Varix asked. 47, Chen said. 47 species have agreements with humanity that would be triggered if this council follows through with military action against Earth. The implications hit the chamber like a shockwave. 47 species, nearly a third of the council. All bound by agreements that would activate the moment the council moved against humanity. "This is blackmail," the Karhoth representative snarled. "No," Chen said firmly. "Blackmail is when you threaten something bad. This is the opposite. We offered something good. We offered partnership, trade, friendship, mutual benefit. You're the ones who decided to threaten us. These agreements are just the natural consequence of 20 years of building real relationships, while you were busy congratulating yourselves on your superiority." A smaller delegate, one of the avian Kreoth, spoke up nervously. "What happens now?" Chen looked at Chancellor Varix. "That's up to the council. You have a choice. You can acknowledge that your ultimatum violates multiple agreements and withdraw it. We can move forward as genuine partners, with humanity having the same rights and respect as any other council member. Or you can push forward with your threats, violate 89 separate agreements, destroy the legal framework that holds this council together, and see what happens." "You would destroy the council?" Varix asked. "We wouldn't," Chen said. "You would. By putting your pride ahead of your own laws and treaties. By treating humanity as a threat to be contained instead of a partner to be respected. By forgetting that laws apply to everyone, even you." She paused, then added quietly, "My grandfather had a saying. It was from an ancient human philosopher named Sun Tzu. He said the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. We don't want war, Chancellor. We never did. But we're not going to submit to injustice just because you have more ships than us." Chancellor Varix slumped in his throne. Around the chamber, delegates were in heated discussion. Some species were clearly angry at humanity. Others were angry at the council. Still others seemed confused about what to think. "This session is adjourned," Varix said finally. "We need time to consider these revelations. Ambassador Chen, you are dismissed." Chen bowed slightly and turned to leave. As she walked toward the exit, she heard the chamber erupting into argument behind her. Voices raised in anger and fear. Accusations flying. The careful unity of the council cracking. She stepped out into the corridor and allowed herself a deep breath. This was the dangerous part. The part where everything could still go wrong. Some species would accept the new reality. Others would fight it. The question was which group would win. She touched the communicator in her ear. "Chen to Earth Command. Phase 2 complete. They know about the agreements. Now we wait and see how they react." A voice crackled back. "Understood, Ambassador. All assets standing by. Good luck." Chen walked toward he. The next 48 hours turned into chaos that spread across the entire Galactic Council network. What started as a simple investigation into humanity's agreements became something much bigger and more frightening for those in power. On the Zorathi homeworld, the Merchant League's Central Archives opened to a team of council investigators. The gray-skinned traders had no choice but to cooperate, though they did so reluctantly. The lead investigator, a methodical Shadari legal expert named Christix, stood in the archive vault surrounded by data crystals that glowed with stored information. "Show us the original human agreement," Christix demanded. The Zorathi archivist, an elderly female with pale skin and tired eyes, pulled a crystal from the shelf. "This is from 23 years ago. First formal agreement between the Merchant League and Earth." Christix inserted the crystal into a reader. Text and data flooded the holographic display. He read through it carefully, his crystalline fingers tracing lines of legal language. When he reached the sovereignty clause, he stopped. This is more sophisticated than we expected, he said quietly. The language is precise. Very precise. It doesn't just protect human sovereignty. It creates a web of obligations that activate under specific conditions. Conditions that match the current ultimatum exactly, the archivist said, as if they knew this would happen. How much trade does the Merchant League do with humanity? Christix asked. The archivist pulled up financial data. Approximately 18% of our total trade volume. In raw credits, about 400 billion per year. Christix felt something cold settle in his core. And if this agreement is violated? We face economic penalties. Loss of access to human markets. Return of all shared technology. Compensation for breach of contract. The archivist paused. The penalties would cost us more than 1 trillion credits. It would devastate our economy for a generation. Christix transmitted his findings back to Nexus Prime with shaking hands. The Zorathi were bound to humanity more tightly than anyone had realized. But the Zorathi were just the beginning. On the insectoid Vrixen homeworld, investigators discovered something even more disturbing. The agreement between the Vrixen and humanity was not just about trade. It was about survival. A Vrixen medical officer explained the situation to a council investigator in a sterile laboratory. 18 years ago, our species faced extinction. A genetic plague was killing our young. Nothing we tried worked. We were dying as a species. And humanity helped? The investigator asked. Human genetic researchers found the problem, the medical officer confirmed. Human DNA has incredible diversity. They used that diversity to develop a treatment. They saved us. In exchange, we agreed to provide them with certain rare minerals and to support their position in matters of sovereignty. Support how? If humanity faces existential threat without clear legal basis, we are obligated to oppose that threat. The medical officer's antennae drooped. The agreement was fair. They saved our children. How could we not agree? The investigator made notes, her stylus scratching against her data pad. Are you still dependent on human medicine? The original plague is cured. But the research partnership continued. Human genetic science is far ahead of ours in some ways. We have ongoing medical exchanges. Cutting ties would set our medical advancement back decades. Similar stories emerged across dozens of worlds. The aquatic Nalthari had agreements about terraforming technology. Human engineers had helped them transform 3 marginal worlds into garden paradises. The agreements included provisions about respecting each other's sovereign territory. The avian Kreoth had cultural exchange programs. Human art and music had become wildly popular in their society. Their agreement protected cultural autonomy against external interference. The silicon-based Thorians had technology-sharing deals. Human computer programming techniques had revolutionized their computing. Their agreement guaranteed mutual protection of intellectual property and territorial integrity. On and on it went. 89 separate agreements. Each one carefully crafted. Each one building a relationship that went beyond simple trade. Each one including protections that seemed innocuous when signed, but now formed a web of interlocking obligations that made action against humanity legally and practically impossible. On Nexus Prime, Chancellor Varric stood in the Council's central archive chamber, surrounded by holographic displays showing all 89 agreements simultaneously. His crystal body flickered with agitation as he tried to comprehend the scope of what humanity had done. They were so careful, said his chief legal advisor, a skeletal being named Thrun. Every agreement is different. Everyone is tailored to the specific species involved. But the underlying structure is the same. Mutual benefit tied to mutual protection. How did we miss this? Varric demanded. How did no one see the pattern? Because they filed each agreement in the correct legal category, Thrun explained. Trade agreements in trade archives, medical exchanges in medical databases, cultural programs in cultural records, technology transfers in technology files. No single department saw all of them. And even if they had, each agreement looks innocent on its own. It's only when you see them all together that the pattern becomes clear. They played us, Varric said bitterly. They made us think they were simple, aggressive, primitive, and while we were congratulating ourselves on controlling them, they were building relationships with 1/3 of the Council. It's more subtle than that, Thrun said. Look at which species they targeted. The Zorathi control galactic trade. The Vrixen are key Council voters. The Nalthari influence waterworld species. The Kreoth lead the cultural bloc. They didn't just pick random partners. They picked species with influence. Species who could sway others. Varric studied the web of connections spreading across the holographic display. Lines connected Earth to 89 worlds, but secondary lines connected those worlds to others. The Zorathi influenced 30 more species through trade. The Vrixen were allies with a dozen others. The pattern spread like a virus through the Council's power structure. How many species would support humanity if this came to a vote? Varric asked. Thrawn ran calculations on his datapad. Direct agreements with 89 species. Secondary influence over perhaps 50 more. If we pushed forward with the ultimatum, we might lose the support of 140 of the 147 council members. That's impossible, Varric said. That would leave only 7 species supporting the ultimatum. 7 species, Thrawn confirmed. Coincidentally, the 7 council leadership species. Us, the Karhoth, and 5 others. The species who led the push for the ultimatum in the first place. The implications were staggering. The council had voted unanimously against humanity because most species feared going against the leadership. But now, faced with the reality of breaking their agreements with Earth, those same species would switch sides. The unanimous vote would reverse. They were prepared for this exact scenario, Varric said quietly. For 20 years they prepared. This was their plan all along. Perhaps, Thrawn said, or perhaps they simply made friends and built partnerships like any species would, but did so with more care and foresight than we gave them credit for. An emergency alert chimed. Another aide rushed into the chamber, her feathered crest raised in agitation. Chancellor, the Zorathi Merchant League has issued a formal statement, she said breathlessly. They're calling for an emergency vote to rescind the ultimatum. On what grounds? On the grounds that it violates 89 registered treaties and threatens the legal foundation of the Council itself. The aide's voice shook. 6 other species have already seconded the motion. The vote will happen in 6 hours. Varric's crystal form dimmed. 6 hours. In 6 hours, the Council would vote again. And this time, the result would be very different. Contact Ambassador Chen, he ordered. Tell her I want to meet. Privately. As his aides rushed to carry out the order, Varric stared at the holographic web of connections. Earth sat at the center like a spider, but unlike a spider waiting for prey, humanity had built this web to protect itself, not to trap others. They had made themselves so interconnected, so valuable, so necessary to so many species, that attacking them meant attacking the entire structure. It was brilliant. It was patient. It was exactly the kind of long-term strategic thinking that the Council had always claimed humans were incapable of. We underestimated them, Varric said to the empty chamber. We thought they were primitive because they were young. We thought they were simple because they were aggressive. We never considered that a species that survived thousands of years of war and politics on their own planet might actually know something about diplomacy that we don't. He looked at one particular data point on the holographic display. The Treaty of First Contact, the document they had all dismissed as simple and crude, the document that contained Rule Number 1, the clause they had thought was meaningless philosophical posturing. Humans had a saying, he remembered. Something about the devil being in the details. The Council had been so focused on the big picture that they had never looked at the details. And in those details, humanity had hidden their victory. Not a military victory, not even a political. The emergency council session began exactly 6 hours after the Zorathi called for a vote. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed beyond capacity. Delegates stood in the aisles. Observers filled every seat in the gallery. News crews from 100 worlds broadcast the proceedings across the galaxy. The atmosphere was electric with tension. This was no longer a simple matter of putting humanity in its place. This was about the fundamental nature of the Council itself. Chancellor Varric called the session to order. His crystal form looked duller than ever, as if the weight of the situation was physically draining him. This emergency session will address the motion to rescind the ultimatum presented to humanity 48 hours ago. Before we vote, delegates may speak. Who wishes to be heard? The Zorathi representative stood immediately. He was a portly male named Rixtar, his gray skin bearing the facial tattoos of a master merchant. His voice carried across the chamber without need for amplification. Honored Council, I speak for the Merchant League and for common sense, Rixtar began. The ultimatum against humanity is not just unjust. It is illegal. It violates 89 registered treaties. It threatens the economic stability of dozens of species, and it makes a mockery of the laws we claim to uphold. The Merchant League speaks of law? The Karhoth representative sneered, rising from his seat. You speak of profit. You have sold your principles for human credits. We have honored our agreements, Rixtar shot back. As the law requires. Can you say the same? Before the Karhoth could respond, the Vrixen representative stood. Her insectoid body quivered with emotion. I must speak. 23 years ago, humanity approached us with trade offers. 18 years ago, they saved my species from extinction. Not because they wanted to control us, not because they wanted to exploit us, but because it was the right thing to do. Because that is what partners do for each other. She turned to face the assembled delegates. Humanity gave us back our future. Our children live because of human science. How can we now abandon them when they face an unjust ultimatum? What kind of species would that make us? A murmur of agreement rippled through many delegates, but not all. The Karhoth representative, a massive reptilian named Gorshak, stood to his full imposing height. His scales gleamed under the chamber lights. His teeth showed in a snarl. You speak of partnership? I speak of manipulation. Humanity has corrupted this council. They have bought loyalty with their technology and trade. They have poisoned our unity with their schemes. Schemes? The Nalthari delegate bubbled, his aquatic form rippling in his environmental suit. Is it a scheme to make friends? Is it corruption to help others? Humanity helped us terraform dead worlds. They shared their knowledge freely. They asked only for respect and fair treatment in return. If that is corruption, then I welcome it. You welcome subordination, Gorshak roared. You welcome human dominance. Can't you see what they've done? They've made themselves indispensable. They've woven themselves into our economies, our technologies, our societies so deeply that we cannot oppose them without hurting ourselves. This is not partnership. This is conquest by another name. Sarah Chen, standing on the central platform as she had for days now, finally spoke. Delegate Gorshak, may I respond? Chancellor Varix nodded wearily. The floor recognizes Ambassador Chen. Chen turned to face the Karhoth directly. You call our partnerships conquest. Let me ask you something. In 20 years of building these relationships, how many species have we invaded? How many governments have we overthrown? How many populations have we enslaved or controlled? You don't need to, Gorshak snarled. You control through dependence. Dependence works both ways, Chen countered. Yes, many species now use human technology, human medicine, human trade, but humans also depend on Zorathi trade networks, on Vrixen rare materials, on Nalthari terraforming expertise, on Kreoth cultural exchanges. These aren't one-way relationships. They're partnerships where both sides benefit and both sides have obligations. She looked around the chamber. You want to call that control? Fine, but then every alliance is control. Every trade deal is conquest. Every friendship is manipulation. Maybe the real problem isn't that we built these relationships. Maybe the real problem is that we did it better than you expected primitive humans to be capable of. The chamber erupted into argument. Delegates shouted at each other. Some species supported Chen's position. Others condemned it. The careful unity of the council shattered into factions before everyone's eyes. A smaller delegate, one of the timid herbivore species from the outer rim, spoke up nervously. Perhaps there is a middle path? Perhaps we can acknowledge that the ultimatum was too harsh but also require humanity to be more transparent about their agreements? There is no middle path, Gorshak declared. Either we are masters of this council, or we are servants to human schemes. There is no compromise. Chancellor Varix struck his gavel, a sharp, crystalline sound that cut through the noise. Delegate Gorshak, you speak of servitude. But who here serves humanity against their will? Who was forced to sign these agreements? We were deceived, Gorshak insisted. How? Chen asked. Every agreement was registered. Every term was clear. Every species had legal representation during negotiations. If you felt deceived, it's because you didn't pay attention. You assumed humans were too primitive to play the political game at your level. That was your mistake, not our deception. Gorshak's eyes blazed with fury. You admit it then. You played us. I admit that we're good at diplomacy, Chen said calmly. We've been doing it for thousands of years on Earth. Longer than some species in this chamber have had civilization. We know how to build alliances. We know how to make ourselves valuable. We know how to create situations where peace is more profitable than war. If that offends you, I apologize. But I won't apologize for being good at something you thought we'd be bad at. The Kreoth delegate, a small avian with bright blue feathers, spoke up in a musical voice. I must say, I find this entire discussion strange. When the Council trades with each other, we call it cooperation. When we build alliances, we call it wisdom. When we make ourselves valuable to each other, we call it progress. But when humanity does these exact same things, we call it manipulation. Why? Silence fell across the chamber. It was a simple question, but it cut to the heart of the matter. Because they're human, someone muttered from the gallery. Exactly, the Kreoth continued. We judge them differently because they're young. Because they're from one planet. Because they haven't had millennia of space civilization, we hold them to standards we don't apply to ourselves. And when they succeed despite our prejudices, we accuse them of cheating rather than admitting we were wrong about them. More delegates began speaking now. Some defended humanity, others attacked. The Council split into clear factions. Species with human agreements generally supported rescinding the ultimatum. Species without those agreements were divided. The 7 leadership species, led by the Karhoth, remained firmly opposed. Hours passed. The debate raged. Finally, Chancellor Varix called for order once more. We must vote, he announced. The question before the Council is simple. Do we rescind the ultimatum against humanity, or do we proceed with enforcement? Before that vote, Gorshak interrupted. I wish to state clearly the position of the Karhoth Empire and 11 other species. If this Council votes to rescind, if this Council chooses human friendship over Council authority, then we will not be bound by that vote. We will take independent action. We will enforce the ultimatum with our own military forces. A shocked silence fell. Independent military action outside Council authority was technically legal, but practically unprecedented. It would fracture the Council completely. Chen's expression finally showed emotion. Not fear, but something like sadness. Delegate Gorshak, are you saying that 12 species would rather destroy the Council than admit humans can be equal partners? We're saying that we will not submit to human dominance, Gorshak declared. Whether through Council authority or independent action, humanity will be contained. Contained, Chen repeated quietly. She looked at Chancellor Varix. Chancellor, I had hoped to avoid this. I truly did. But Delegate Gorshak has left me no choice. She pulled out her data tablet once more. Before you vote, there's something else you should know. Something I've been authorized to reveal only if necessary. Varix's crystal form flickered with apprehension. What now, Ambassador? Chen took a deep breath. You've all been focused on the 89 agreements, on the political and economic ties we've built. But there's another layer you haven't considered. The practical one, she tapped her tablet. Over 20 years, as we built these partnerships, we also integrated our technology into Council infrastructure. Zorethi trade networks run on human-designed quantum communications. Vrixen medical facilities use human genetic scanners. Nalthari terraforming equipment includes human environmental processors. The Council's own hyperlane network was, upgraded 10 years ago using human consulting firms. The implications spread through the chamber like ripples on water. You're saying our infrastructure depends on human technology? Varix asked quietly. Not depends, Chen clarified, but includes. Significant amounts, all legally licensed, all properly documented. But yes, human technology is woven throughout Council systems, which mean the Grand Assembly Hall had never been so quiet. The revelation about the 89 fleets surrounding Earth hung in the air like a physical weight. Delegates stared at their datapads at each other, at Sarah Chen standing calmly on the central platform. The impossible had become real right before their eyes. Gorshak, the massive Karhoth warrior, stood frozen. His scales, usually gleaming with confidence, seemed dull. His claws, capable of rending metal, hung uselessly at his sides. For the first time in his long military career, he faced a battle he could not win. This is not possible, he said finally, his voice lacking its earlier fury. 89 fleets could not move into position without our intelligence detecting them. Our networks would have warned us. Chen tilted her head slightly. Your intelligence networks that use quantum communications? The ones that were upgraded 8 years ago with human encryption protocols? Those networks? The implications hit Gorshak like a physical blow. You manipulated our own intelligence systems. We didn't manipulate anything, Chen corrected. We simply made sure the fleet movements were classified under trade protection maneuvers, which they technically are. Every ship is there to protect their economic and political interests in the Sol system. All completely legal under Council regulations. Chancellor Varric spoke up, his crystal voice weary. How long have you been planning this specific moment, Ambassador? Chen was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. The honest answer? We've been planning for a moment like this since the day we signed the first contact treaty. We didn't know when it would come. We didn't know what form it would take, but we knew that eventually, the Council would try to contain us, to limit us, to put us in our place. She looked around the chamber. Humans have long memories, Chancellor. We remember when we were divided into hundreds of nations on Earth. We remember the empires that tried to dominate others. We remember the wars fought over pride and power. We learned lessons from thousands of years of conflict. The most important lesson? The best defense is to make yourself too valuable to destroy and too connected to isolate. So this was always a trap, the Vrixen representative said softly. From the very beginning. Not a trap, Chen replied. A foundation. We built real relationships. We offered real value. We created real partnerships. The defensive aspect was just insurance. We hoped we'd never need it. But we're human. Hope is not a strategy. We prepare for the worst while working for the best. One of the smaller delegates, a nervous herbivore species, asked the question many were thinking. What happens now? Do those fleets attack? Is there going to be war? That depends entirely on Delegate Gorshak and his allies, Chen said, turning to face the Karhoth. The fleets are there to defend Earth, not to attack anyone. If your 12 species choose to stand down, they'll return to their normal positions. No shots fired. No blood spilled. We can all move forward. Move forward under human dominance, Gorshak spat, but his voice lacked conviction now. Move forward as equals, Chen countered. That's all we've ever wanted. To be treated as equals. Not as primitives to be managed. Not as threats to be contained. Just as another species in the galactic community with the same rights, the same respect, and the same voice as anyone else. Chancellor Varric descended from his throne for the first time in the session. He approached Chen directly, his crystalline form refracting light across the chamber floor. When he spoke, his voice was quiet enough that only nearby delegates could hear clearly. You have humbled us, Ambassador. You have shown that our assumptions about humanity were wrong. You have proven that age and experience are not the same as wisdom. He paused. But I must ask, what is the real cost of your victory? You fractured the Council. You've exposed our intelligence vulnerabilities. You've demonstrated that much of our infrastructure depends on your technology. Have you considered that you may have broken the very system you wanted to join? Chen met his gaze steadily. The Council was already broken, Chancellor. A system built on the assumption that some species are naturally superior to others is not a system worth preserving. A system where unanimous votes happen because everyone is afraid to disagree with the leadership is not a system that serves justice. She gestured around the chamber. Look at what's happening here. For the first time in decades, species are speaking their minds. They're choosing their own positions rather than following the leadership blindly. They're acting based on their interests and their principles rather than fear. Yes, it's messy. Yes, it's chaotic. But it's also honest. And honesty is the foundation of any real community. Varric's crystal body pulsed thoughtfully. You would remake the Council in your image. Not in our image, Chen said. In everyone's image. A council where all voices matter, where agreements are honored, where laws apply equally to everyone, where being young or old, strong or weak doesn't determine your worth. Is that really so radical? Before Varric could respond, an alarm chimed throughout the chamber. Multiple data pads lit up simultaneously. Delegates looked at their screens in confusion, then shock. What now? Gorshak demanded. A junior aide rushed to Chancellor Varric's side, her feathered crest raised in agitation. She whispered urgently in his ear. Varric's crystal form went completely dark for a moment. It seems, Varric announced to the chamber, that several dozen more species have just transmitted formal statements. Species that did not have prior agreements with humanity. They are declaring their support for Earth's position and calling for comprehensive council reform. How many? Someone asked. 43 species, Varric said, which brings the total supporting humanity to 132 out of 147. The number hung in the air. 132 species. Nearly 90% of the council. Chen allowed herself a small smile. It seems that other species were also tired of the old system. They were just waiting for someone to prove that change was possible. Gorshak looked around the chamber at the sea of delegates, most of whom now openly opposed his position. His warrior's pride warred with his strategic mind. Finally, his shoulders slumped slightly. "The Karhoth Empire does not accept defeat easily," he said, his voice rough. "But we recognize reality. 12 fleets cannot stand against 89, and we cannot fight 132 species." He looked at Chen with something that might have been respect. "You have won this confrontation, human. But do not mistake our restraint for weakness. If you prove to be the threat we fear, we will respond." "Fair enough," Chen said. "All we ask is that you judge us by our actions, not your assumptions. Give us a chance to prove we can be good partners." Gorshak nodded curtly and sat down. The fight had gone out of him. Chancellor Varix returned to his throne, though he seemed diminished somehow. "The Council must now address the reality before us. The ultimatum has been rescinded. The threat of military action has ended. But we face difficult questions about the future, about our structure, about our assumptions, about our purpose." He looked at Chen. "Ambassador, you have demonstrated humanity's skill at diplomacy. You have proven your species' worth, but you have also revealed the flaws in our system. What would you have us do?" Chen considered carefully. "I would have you remember why the Council was formed in the first place. To promote peace, to facilitate cooperation, to protect all species from aggression and injustice, not to maintain the power of the old over the young, not to enforce conformity, but to make space safe and prosperous for everyone." She paused. "The specific reforms are not for me to dictate. That should be a conversation among all Council members with equal voices. But I can tell you what humanity hopes for. We hope for a Council where agreements are honored, where laws are applied fairly, where species are judged by their actions, not their age or origin, where diplomatic skill is respected, not punished, where making friends is encouraged, not treated as conspiracy. A council of genuine partners," the Kreoth delegate said, her musical voice approving. "Exactly," Chen agreed. The next hours saw the beginning of that conversation. Delegates proposed reforms. They debated structure. They discussed representation and decision-making. It was messy and contentious, but it was also productive in ways the Council had not been for generations. Chen mostly listened, offering input when asked, but generally letting others shape the discussion. This was not about human dominance. It was about creating space for all voices. Finally, as the session stretched into its 12th hour, Chancellor Varix called for a recess. "We will reconvene tomorrow to continue these discussions. For now, we are all exhausted. Ambassador Chen, you are dismissed with the Council's gratitude for your patience." Chen bowed and turned to leave. As she walked toward the exit, various delegates approached her. Some offered congratulations. Others asked questions about specific parts of the human agreements. A few simply wanted to thank her for speaking truths they had been afraid to voice. The Zorathi merchant Rixtar caught up with her in the corridor. "Ambassador Chen, that was remarkable. I've been in galactic politics for 60 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Thank you."